Thank you for joining another exciting episode of Meyerside Chats. Today, I am grateful to have Leslie Crutchfield with us. Leslie is an author, educator, and social change expert and executive director of Business for Impact at Georgetown University's McDonough School of Business. Business for Impact is founded on the belief that companies can be a powerful force for good in the world and delivers world-class education, student experience, and cross-sector collaborations for people, planet, and profit. Leslie's latest book is How Change Happens, Why Some Movements Succeed While Others Don't. Got it right here. And it is an amazing book, highly recommended. And it's been noted in the New York Review of Books as a blueprint for groups inspired to take action on today's major causes. Leslie also co-authored the best-selling Forces for Good, the 6 practices of high-impact nonprofits recognized by The Economist on its best books of the year list, and Do More Than Give. She teaches corporate social responsibility in Georgetown's MBA program and nonprofit leadership on LinkedIn Learning. Leslie previously was the managing director at Ashoka, the global venture fund for social entrepreneurs, and co-founded a national nonprofit social enterprise in her 20s. She's contributed to Fortune, Forbes, Chronicle of Philanthropy, and Stanford Social Innovation Review, and has appeared on programs such as ABC, Fox, NPR, PBS. She's volunteered on Seed Foundation and Kiva's boards and with the Crossroads of Africa. She holds an MBA and BA from Harvard. Leslie, it is an honor to have you here today. Nice to see you.
Great to be here, Evan, enjoying the cozy Meyerside chat format.
It is cozy. It is cozy. And we're live today from Sedona, funny enough. Beautiful place to be doing this. I feel energized, spiritually enlightened. But I have this wonderful book here that I just finished reading, and having you on a chat about it is awesome. It is such an important book for a lot of reasons. It is inspiring. It is informative. It can give people a blueprint of how to think about movements that they're really passionate about. And I think that's amazing. You've really dissected a number of different causes and on all sides of the aisle, which is super impressive that you've been able to do this with such impartiality. I'd love to understand a little bit, just to kick things off, like how did you, it's very hard to do that. I was looking for bias and I couldn't find any, and I was really impressed. So how did you write this book without being able to put pervasive language in there that would skew people's thinking towards a political stance?
Thanks so much, Evan, for having me here, and really excited to dive in. I think the impartiality approach to the book really was just easy to do because we really didn't set out to prove a political point of view or a political ideology. We really wanted to understand how change happens. So we started out by saying, what are some big changes that have occurred in the 21st century, in our lifetimes, in the last couple decades? What are the big impacts, for better or for worse, depending on your political view or your social view? But undeniably, these changes have happened. So we grounded our research in truth and fact, first of all. So here's some big changes that have happened in the 2000s and the 2010s. Big changes in America. People in America have pretty much stopped smoking. Smoking rates are under 15% for adults, under 6% for youth. Gen Z might be the generation that ends smoking cigarettes for good. We're going to leave vaping aside because with movements, it's whack-a-mole. One thing starts, another thing stops. You got to keep at it. But that's a change that has happened. We wanted to understand how and why that change happened. Millions of lives saved, hundreds of millions of people that would have been suffering from smoking and tobacco use related diseases averted because of the tobacco control movement. Another big change that's happened in our lifetimes. LGBT marriage. We have same-sex marriage now. Today it's the law of the land. At the start of the 21st century, we had DOMA. We had a federal law, the Defense of Marriage Act, banning same-sex marriage. We had 13 states with ballot referendums underway trying to never allow gay marriage. So that has flipped in our lifetimes. And another big change that's happened. The gun rights movement has massively expanded its footprint. There are more gun shops in America than McDonald's and Starbucks combined. We have access. We can stockpile assault weapons. We can have private citizens owning and using firearms. The movement and the organized by the NRA, the National Rifle Association, has been very successful in expanding the right to own and use firearms. We also looked at the movements that are countering those things. Why has gun control not been able to gain as much ground as the gun rights movement? We looked at climate. A big change that happened at the turn of the century was we solved acid rain in North America. We got the sulfur out of our atmosphere, but climate, carbon reduction, we are not making as much progress on that. Why? So we looked at, first of all, just the facts, what's changed, what hasn't, depending if you love it or you hate it. And then, how did it happen? So we looked at the movements and we talked to the leaders and we talked to grassroots participants and funders and journalists, and anybody could give us a view into how it happened. And that's how we ended up writing the book.
Yeah, it's almost the opposite of a lot of the mainstream journalism that's out there today, which made it so refreshing to see it in this way. It's difficult to do, so it's commendworthy. But one of the things, and you were saying, why didn't some of them succeed? And one of the things I remember resonated with me, especially around the LGBTQ movement, was that they changed their language, right? They changed, they, instead of coming with a why we need rights, they came with why from a standpoint of love for all of us, and made people relate to their situation, even if they weren't LGBTQ.
Exactly. That was a real pivotal moment in the history of the LGBT movement. Because you're right, back starting in the 60s and the 70s, you had Stonewall, you had protests, marches, the need to recognize LGBT community members and the rights that they had. They were being discriminated against. They couldn't get jobs, right? They couldn't be open with their relationships, getting bullied, getting beat up. Many states had laws in the books that made these relationships illegal, right? By the time the Supreme Court ruled in favor of same-sex marriage in 2015 in that landmark case, the view, the attitude, the norm across most of America, not all of America, had started to shift, right? And how did that happen? Leaders in the same-sex marriage equality movement, Freedom to Marry was one of the kind of coalitions driving a lot of the change, working with a big spectrum of NGO and advocacy organizations. And they started to do some research. This goes back right to the turn of the century, the turn of the 21st century, back when we had DOMA in the early 2000s. And all these states were trying to ban gay marriage. And the LGBT movement was really, they were up against the ropes. We're losing, right? And it at that moment, gay marriage didn't look inevitable, like we talked about it after the fact. It looked impossible. So they started really trying to understand where most of people in America were at, right? So not just talking to their own camp, but they started to map out in America, you can think of a bell curve, right? And at one end of the bell curve, you might have 10, 20% of the population that's in the movement. They do identify as LGBT. They support this, even though there's a lot of contention, even within the community, about whether they should have full marriage, because there was dissension in the ranks. A lot of members of the community said, we don't want to be like straight people. We don't want to use their norms. We want something different. But on the other end of that bell curve would be the far right. People who, under no uncertain circumstances, would never accept LGBT marriage, lifestyle, anything. Religious conservatives, political conservatives, ideologically, fundamentally opposed to the very notion. On those two ends of the bell curve, that left about 80% of America that was in what Evan Wolfson, the founder of Freedom to Marry Caucus, described as the persuadable middle. There's about 80% of people that were not hardcore for, not hardcore against, just didn't know. And so they started talking to that 80% of America, polling, all different kinds of polls done. And they would ask questions like, okay, you're a straight person. Why did you get married? I got married because I want to, be married under the eyes of God. We want to raise our children. We're in love. We got married because we're in love. And then another question in the poll would be, okay, then why do you think a gay person might want to get married? Number one answer in the 2000s, early 2000s. Why do you think, Evan, people said?
For financial benefit.
Financial benefit, or can I visit my partner in the hospital if they're sick?
Oh, hospital. Yeah. So
those were answers, but that was not the number one answer. The number one answer in the early 2000s of why a straight person thought a gay person might want to get married was this: I don't know. Why do they want to get married? I never thought about it. I really don't know. And that's when the light bulb went off for the LGBT advocates. They're like, we want to get married because we're in love. Just like different sex couples. Right. We're in love and we want to have kids and we want to be married in our church in the eyes of God. We want all the things that the different sex couples, we're no different, right? Yep. Except for obviously the gender identity of our partner. So that's when the shift happened. And so all of the social media and the advocacy and the activism, the messaging, the narrative became about love. And instead of marching in the streets and demanding that you recognize my rights, you are discriminating against me, right? Which is an oppositional frame. We're in love, you're in love, who's against love, right? And so there's this pivotal moment and described in a great book, if you want to read more about this movement, called Winning Marriage by Mark Solomon, where he describes this moment where the advocates had set up a meeting between then Vice President Joe Biden and two men that had a family they were raising out in California. It was this very personal interaction, and Biden describes getting to meet these two kids. And of course, when the two kids come in, he lights up and he's talking to them about Champ, his German Shepherd, and he gives them stuffed animals. Biden likes to give stuffed animals. And he just was like, look at this beautiful family. How can you be against this? And so it was these intimate, one-on-one, very personal moments that added up to a movement. Again, using love as the channel between these sides that otherwise were either in opposition or just ignorance about the whole thing.
And in this case, it happened to be about love, specifically because it's about marriage. In many cases, it may not be necessarily love, but just reframing it for people in a way they understand, that they can relate to, or identifying that the thing, like you said, they just never even thought about it. It was like their mind exploded in a sense with the possible. I can't even believe it's possible that they would have some way of loving each other. Like they just never thought about it. They didn't know. It wasn't an active conversation they've had with anyone or themselves or whatever. So and I think that's a really good way of looking at a lot of these issues. And another one of these reasons that you've given is transcendent listening. And Fred Krupp from Environmental Defense Fund,
EDF
president. I actually have may I read a short snippet from the book around how he was inspired here? Okay. Krupp was influenced by the writings, and just for a little background for people, he was responsible for putting forth the cap and trade program in regards to acid rain was the main reason for that, which has been very successful. And it was because he listened to the needs of the people that he needed to think about how to reduce the impact that they were creating. And those were businesses. And they created a business model type program that they can participate in without necessarily just scolding them and do I have that right?
Yeah, they were trying to set the context for this passage that I think you're going to read out. Environmental Defense Fund understood that they're an environmental advocacy NGO, but they're talking to scientists, they're talking to economists, they're trying to understand businesses that are doing the emissions of sulfur that's contributing to the acid rain. So in this piece talks about how they really tried to understand the point of view of each of these stakeholder groups before coming up with a solution. Go ahead.
That's right. That's right. Okay. The most important thing is to really get into their shoes and understand their viewpoints. Listening doesn't really explain it. The word transcend comes to mind. And I'm going to jump down. Krupp was influenced by the writings of Jesuit theologian Father John Donne, explored the phenomenon of passing over, deliberately entering into the experience of others and understanding what they believe with complete empathy. Passing over is a shifting of standpoint, or going over to the standpoint of another culture, another way of life, another religion. It is followed by an equal and opposite process we might call coming back with a new insight to one's own culture, one's own way of life, one's own religion. Donne practiced passing over with people who held religious beliefs different from his. Far from dissolving his own religious commitment, he held that this practice helped him see his own beliefs more clearly. That's beautiful. It's
Amazing.
beautiful because you think you're going to come out like you can either go in with an argument or you can go in with transcendent listening and come out with insights to support your own belief, but understand the bigger picture better.
Exactly. And it's so easy to respect that process. It's very hard to do, right? Because you have to suspend your own belief ideology. Donne was a Jesuit theologian. This practice a lot in the Jesuit tradition. I work at Georgetown University is where I teach, and it's a Jesuit institution. If you're Jesuit or Catholic, you might think it's odd to spend a lot of time studying Judaism. Might that convert you to this other belief system? In fact, no, by really understanding their beliefs, their rituals, what's influencing, it affirms your own beliefs and also gives you greater understanding of someone who's very different, coming from a different place. So I think this is a hallmark of great leaders, and the successful leaders that we studied in our movements research, and I would say across the board in nonprofit business, public service, the ability to listen and then listen with empathy to the other side, withhold judgment for a moment, understand where they're coming from, and then bring that back. Sometimes you might change your mind. Sometimes you might harden your point of view, but you'll have a deeper understanding of where the other person's coming from. And it's that listening with empathy, I think that is hard to do. And these successful movement leaders really mastered this. When you go back to the LGBT same-sex marriage equality movement, they were saying, okay, we're going to really listen to non-gay people. Where are you at on this? We're not trying to convert you to become a member of the LGBT community. Our goal is, can we persuade you to be open to the possibility of allowing us to marry too, just like straight people, right? And by really listening and understanding, this aha moment of love start, and then they carried it through, and they did this in really, I think, sophisticated and creative ways. Everything from one campaign in Massachusetts, you had Massachusetts, which had passed a marriage bill, and then Romney and the Catholic Church and a lot of conservatives were trying to repeal the right to marriage for same-sex couples up in Massachusetts back in the early part of this 21st century. And so they took this message of love and they put it out. They made this ad. And now up in Massachusetts, you have to realize there's two religions. You got Catholicism and hockey, ice hockey, right? So they found these two hockey moms that were raising their son who happened to be like a state champ. And the ad's all about them getting up at 5 a.m, freezing their butts off at practices to get the rink time, just like the straight parents. And then they're celebrating the big win on the ice. And they're using air quotes. So they're normalizing. These families are just like the other families, right? Or another creative approach that got some controversy in the LGBT activism community was they'd have a chat like this with a straight guy who's an uncle. And he's talking about how his nephew wants to marry his male partner. And the uncle's coming around to it. I think about it like I want him to have what me and his aunt have, love and commitment. We want to have kids, and I want him to have what I have. And the protagonist in these videos are straight people. So then some people in the LGBT community were like, why are we doing videos of straight people? We're the ones that are being discriminated against in this. No, if you want to convince straight 80% of that bell curve in America that you need somebody who looks and talks like them that they can identify with, and then once they can hear the message, right?
Right.
They're more open to it. So
Right.
and it gets into having to sublimate your own ego. It's not about you being in the video, right? Or you have to be several steps beyond that. Tobacco control and anti-smoking is also another great example. If you want to talk about other movements that have really understood their audiences, their target audiences, and then developed content that speaks to them in a really effective way.
Well, do you think that this approach can help? I'll say this: it in many of the conversations that I've had, it's been repeated that listening is one of the main things. Active listening, empathy, right? These words when you're having conversations before you're about to divorce your family for their political beliefs, try to come from this place, right? Or when you're going to council meetings and public comment, or you're at any of these different commissions or neighborhood meetings, or wherever that you're voicing your opinion, or you're there to active listen. But it has been the common theme. And I'm wondering how to get that message out to people, because it seems like if movements can succeed on this is also something that we talk about in like relationships in general, being able, whether it's your partner or close friends or family, whatever, is there a way to use this, or how can we use it more effectively in the political realm to bridge divides and at least reduce toxicity so people can have meaningful conversations and at least respect the differences of political beliefs, even when they're on different sides of the aisle?
I hope so. Absolutely. And I think that there are possibilities. I think a couple things. Your whole series here is really focused on this increasingly intensified and divisive moment that we're in with our society here in America, all around the world. And we've gone from warring parties that have lots of disagreements over policy, over approach, that now it's the parties don't just disagree. They think the other side is actively trying to hurt America, and they hate the other side, right? It's not agree to disagree. It's you're wrong, I'm right, and you are not only wrong, you're trying to do bad things to the country, and we don't trust you, and your view is not legitimate. So that's where we're at, as too well. And one thing that I think the transcendent listening approach requires is like camps on both sides of any issue have to engage in it. It's not just, you could take let's take you often hear on the left, the political left in America, but they don't understand where all of the MAGA support movement people are coming from. And it's they haven't necessarily walked in their shoes, lived in these communities, faced there's challenges, right? And you could take the time to understand that. At the same time, the people on the right need to be able to do that for the progressives on the left. And obviously that's not happening right now to a large degree. Both sides have to be ready.
Yeah. And I guess one of the things that I think about is also to forget about when you're engaging that, you almost have to forget about the extremes. Like I think people need to remember, or at least the approach that I take is, a lot of the stuff you're seeing is an opportunity for companies to get you to like and click, and algorithms that put controversial content. Everyone seems to know this. It seems to be almost common knowledge that algorithms are showing you what in your filter bubbles, right? You're seeing the same stuff that gets you to keep liking and clicking. There's ads being sold to you because the more you're on there, there was a quote, someone said it. I won't shout out the name, but it was a famous person said, our only competitor is sleep. So and it was a media company. So when you're thinking about, all right, so then how are you going to make money? And it's on ads, and that's the goal. But we know this, we understand this is the issue, but we continue to embrace extreme viewpoints that are on Facebook, that are from sources that are not verified. A friend sent it to you, and even verified sources. Even the best of these publications are putting out things to get you to read it. And I just think there's such a middle ground. We
Well,
forget to focus on that middle ground. Like you said before, the 80% of the people in the middle.
right. The operative word here that we got to be cognizant of is, you said, we know this. Intellectually, we know the algorithms are pushing us more divisive stuff. But here's the thing. We know in marketing, psychology, behavioral economics, we are governed by our reptile brains, right? There's that deep in our brain cord back there, these very visceral emotional reactions, and they take over. So when you're on your Facebook page and you see something that elicits a really strong emotional reaction, we know that the likes and the shares get the highest activity on the angry, hostile, incendiary drama. We've known forever of media, if it bleeds, it leads, right? Yeah. That gets your blood pressure up, that gives you an emotional reaction. In this case, it's cortisol, it's adrenaline, it's anger. And so you're going to exponentially share that out more because it's triggered an emotion, right? Anything that's blah, not exciting, it's not going to get shared. So anything that taps that anger and emotion gets amplified way out of proportion to the actual number of people, for instance, that might truly hold that view. So that's one fact that happens. And then you've got, as you were alluding to, nefarious actors that have outside of the US that have interest in US sowing discord, trying to overthrow the government, trying to elect someone like the former President Trump, who was more friendly towards Russia. It's in foreign actors' interest to have us be doing those things. So that gets accelerated. And so even though we know, as you said, in America, we're not dumb, like we know, but we can't override our reptile brains. And so the antidote is, how do you make content that is truthful, is productive, leading to civil discourse, equally emotionally exciting, right? But in another way. So I think about some of these other movements, like tobacco control, for instance. The anti-smoking movement was up against some pretty powerful forces. The tobacco industry, huge, billions and billions in revenue. They owned all the Mad Men marketing advertising agencies on Madison Avenue up in New York. They employed all the lobbyists on K Street. Every tobacco growing state had a vested economic interest in keeping people smoking. So billions of dollars in money and politics tied up. It's a formidable force. Beyond that, the advocates not only had to combat and work against these powerful industry interests, the norm, the attitudes around smoking in the previous century, 70s, 80s, smoking's cool, smoking's sexy. They were fighting Marlboro Man and Joe Camel, right? There's sociological research in poor Black and brown communities of kids. Joe Camel has higher name recognition in some of these communities than Mickey Mouse or Santa Claus, right? Like, the marketing is pervasive. And so how do you detangle smoking from these alluring, sexy images? So when you look at the Truth Initiative and a lot of the campaigns coming out of the tobacco control movement, coordinated by a coalition with Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids at the center, they were trying to put out ads that would combat young people's interest and acceptance of smoking. So how did they do it? It goes back to our conversation before about really listening. The creators of these tobacco control ads spent a lot of time really understanding attitudes, opinions of millennials, Gen Z. What do you care about? What are the psychographics of these young people? And they, first of all, know that young people aren't going to listen to adults telling them what to do. I have 3 kids. The best way to get one of my sons to do something that's dangerous is to tell him not to do it, and it's dangerous. Number one way to get them to try it, right? So they did all this research, and they came out with, there's a really popular social media thing that just went viral in a nanosecond around cats, right? And It's stupid cats doing silly things and costumes, the typical YouTube addictive stuff. And the punchline is secondhand smoke can kill the pet. Smoking equals no stupid cat videos. The punchline
Right.
for the young people is not you shouldn't smoke. It's you're not going to have a cat and cat videos if you smoke. And that gets them where they care. Like,
Meet people where they're at.
got it. And so you got to go, and kids don't care about their own health. So, and they got three things right in these videos, the ones that have been very effective. One, they got the right message, right? The message isn't you shouldn't, smoking's bad for you. Smoking could hurt your pet. Kids care a lot about their pets. Message, the thing they got right, number two, is they had the right messenger in these videos. It was the cats. It wasn't a mom wagging her finger. It wasn't a doctor in a lab coat. Nobody in authority. There weren't even any people in these videos, right? It's just cats. And then the third thing is they had the right medium. So of course, teens are on consuming all their media on social media, YouTube these days, right? So right message, right messenger, right medium. And of course, these homespun looking kitchen table made type videos had millions of dollars of research that went behind them to make them look so quaint, right? And so you've got to fight fire with fire in these movements. And in the case of smoking, you were up against these really sophisticated advertising forces. And all of the movements that we studied, by the way, found ways to tap into emotions to move people in the direction of their cause.
And I guess that's similar to thinking, I suppose, in that way is important. You've mentioned, and you show how they're very similar for businesses or social causes. The way that you need to get to people, have an audience, the right medium, right, is very similar for a business. If you're trying to get something, like the idea of meeting somewhere where they're at to buy something or to change their heart.
Yeah. It's all marketing. There's different kinds of marketing. So in business, you've got commercial marketing. In social change world, we call it social marketing. But it's all about your marketing to get somebody to change a behavior. So in business, if it's soda in your Pepsi, you're trying to get people to not drink Coke and drink Pepsi, right? You're trying to convince a consumer to switch over. Or if they're younger, you're trying to get them to be loyal to your brand once they start making their own purchases, right? So it's a lot about switching. The behavior is to not choose that brand and use this different brand. And there's lots of tools within marketing's toolkit to do that. You can lower the price. You can get a celebrity like Cardi B to be your spokesperson and amp up the brand, right? There's all things you can do to get people to make that behavior change. In social marketing, in the world of public health and trying to have people do things that benefit their health, not smoke or wear a condom so they don't get STDs or whatever the behavior is, you're marketing them to choose a different behavior. So to either stop smoking or never pick up a cigarette, right? Drunk driving was one of the big movements that we studied. We've dramatically cut drunk driving death and injury rates in half in America with the ascent of the Mothers Against Drunk Driving movement. And a big part of that was really trying to tap into getting people to change their behavior, never get behind a wheel, right? One of their marketing campaigns that went viral way before we had the internet, because this was like back in the 90s, was adopting the friends don't let friends drive drunk idea, right? Putting it on friends, the accountability of each other. And it was an easy action to do. Friends does take the keys, come up with a designated driver. And
I say that for all sorts of things. It was that good. I still just say that for all sorts of things about what friends shouldn't let friends do.
Now, they didn't come up with that. It was a Canadian marketing agency that came up with the friends don't let friends drive drunk slogan. But MAD made it happen. And this connects to another piece of our research, which is because Mothers Against Drunk Driving, or MAD, had chapters all around the country, grassroots, community-based chapters. It was really easy for them to go person to person at a very visceral local level with these messages. Fast forward to today, obviously a lot of this is happening on social media and can happen more instantaneously.
Yeah. So in part of this, there's this triple bottom line thing that everyone loves to talk about. And as a business, we all strive towards triple bottom line, or at least people say that they do. Different companies. Now, part of that is purpose. Every company now seems to, or many companies seem to adopt some form of purpose as their really to identify with people's causes, I suppose. It's part of a market share conversation, but it's also doing good for things they believe. You hope their values are aligned with their actions. Do you think that the triple bottom line business in thinking, are there enough tools and resources, and can hearts and mind change enough and make enough money for the businesses can make enough money to solve some of like the real serious stuff we have going on, the homelessness crisis and mental illness and fentanyl and obesity? There's a nice section in there about obesity and what it takes to change, how complex that is. And what it can, the rules of this book, Transcendent Listening, and triple bottom line businesses who can all, because ultimately, if you can make, there is a lot, if you can make money on it and build an ecosystem in a way that people can profit, you've got a real self-perpetuating mechanism for change. Can it be used to solve some of these really pervasive issues that we're seeing right now in the country?
I think it's a really interesting question because, first of all, business, whether you're a sustainable business trying to do right by people on the planet or you're not, business is having an impact on all these issues: climate, our health, obesity, everything, right? And businesses can be part of the solution, just like they can and are part of the problem. So it's, I think, two separate issues. I think for Georgetown, McDonough, we think a lot about sustainability and the triple bottom line as doing well by doing good. So it's not make a lot of money over here, sell the most stuff you can at the cheapest price, at the highest margin, and then give it away in philanthropy over here, right? Like a 1%. Most companies in America give a little less than 1% away in kind and cash donations, by the way. It's a relatively small share in America. But when you're truly sustainable, trying to meet the triple bottom line of the needs of people, meaning your workers, the communities where you market and sell your stuff, and the planet, and still retain profitability, you're trying to do that all at once, right? Rather than after the fact, giving it away. I think for one of the beauties of market-based solutions, they do exist to some problems. So let's go back to the issue of acid rain, which we solved in North America, versus carbon and global warming, which we're facing now, globally, obviously. When Krupp was doing that transcendent listening that we were talking about before, they were talking to not just environmentalists and citizens who were suffering because our lakes were dead. There was no fish up in the Great Lakes, right? Every time it rained in parts of the Midwest and up into Canada, our car paint was peeling. The monuments outside were crumbling from this acid rain, right? So there was real effects of this happening. And so the environmental community was saying, we want to stop this, but let's understand, where are all the stakeholders in this problem? And the primary emitters of sulfur were these manufacturing plants, these companies. So the environmental advocates for Environmental Defense Fund spent a lot of time talking to business leaders. Okay, what would it take to reduce overall emissions? And the answer is, we're businesses, we compete. So make us compete to lower sulfur. So that's where this policy innovation of trade and then cap it came in. They said, okay, we'll let businesses produce a certain amount of sulfur emissions, and then we'll cap it. Everybody has to stay below this cap. And if you can't stay below the cap, then you got to trade, right? And so it created a market. And in the end, instead of taxing the sulfur, doing something after the fact, businesses themselves lowered their sulfur emissions much more quickly than was projected by the economists and the EPA, because it was a race to the bottom, right? They wanted to compete, and it worked. Now, the cap and trade solution was proposed for carbon in the Waxman-Markey bill that passed the House but died in the Senate under Obama administration. And there's a lot of other reasons for that. It wasn't the policy solution. In this case, it goes to the environmental movement. It really didn't have the force at the grassroots level to hold the elected officials accountable to get that all the way through. But that's another part of the conversation if you want to go there.
Yeah, I guess just since you're bringing it back to cap and trade, there are mechanisms like that if they can be thought of I'm hopeful, and I do believe it's possible. I just think it's difficult. That took thousands of years of human development to realize that you can like do something like that, and at least hundreds of years in this country to get to that solution, which could be used for, if you can think in that sort of way, maybe it can be used for those causes.
Now, to your question about can we adopt more sustainable practices, how can you make money and do the right thing by people or the planet? And I think one of the problems is like there's so much of our vested interests are stuck in the system as we have it now, right? A soda company can try and reduce the amount of plastic in its single-use plastic bottles and use EV vehicle emissions to distribute them to their vending machines and convenience stores and fast food franchises, et cetera. But overall, we're still dependent on these individual servings of plastic, right? And yes, you can ban all the straws or try and do cardboard straws, which helps the oceans, but it's not getting at the fundamental consumer kind of system that everybody's operating on.
So can it be used to solve homelessness, mental illness, drug addiction?
Let's just take the last thing, drug addiction. So if you look at the opioid crisis, obviously you can certainly point to some of the origins of where we got now is from business, right? The Sacklers, Purdue, not just producing a pain blocking or pain reducing medicine, but really aggressively going out into vulnerable communities, marketing it, and knowing the addictive property, making it widely available. Obviously, there's physicians that are prescribing it, pharmacists that are distributing it, government that's subsidizing it. So there's a whole complex behind it. So can business be the solution, right? If it's the creator of the problem? I think the answer is that we need to really step back and say, what kind of responsibility do we want our companies to take?
Yeah.
Because we have very lax rules in the United States, and our rules right now are very much in favor of business. And with Citizens United now, of course, businesses can act as individuals in the political system as well.
Yeah.
So I think the answer to these big complex issues, I don't think business alone can solve it. They can reduce their harm by not engaging in harmful marketing practices, right? But it's going to take movements that are demanding of our government and our public officials, hey, we need resources to help people with counseling and recovery, right? Not treating these addictions as a crime, but as what they are, a mental or a medical issue, and solving it that way. And the other countries that are there, and they have a different framing for it.
Yeah. Interestingly, there's been a massive use of art, street art particularly, and I know this from personal experience because it's one of the things that I do in my company, and my business partner, Moral Masuoka, who actually introduced me to your book, and I were talking, and we were a lot of times causes use art as a way to get people, and they do campaigns using street art. Great businesses do it too, actually. Right. So it's not, they try to find creative ways of using art to inspire. Art has a ton of great implications, not just street art, but art therapy. And there's a lot of self-reflection that goes into that, and getting people to see things, to connect through art is a lot. How have you seen the street art movement or art in general be a contributor to the overall ways that people are using messaging to get their word out, their cause out to change the hearts and minds of people.
I think street art, it's really fascinating and a great hands-on way for people to get engaged, right? With taking ownership of your urban or neighborhood properties. There's a great movement led by an organization called Kaboom, which is building playgrounds around the country. They imagine a playground within safe walking distance of every kid in America. And part of the process is getting community members to design and imagine what this playground could look like, and then pulling up their sleeves and building it together. And then there's ownership and there's engagement, and then you've fostered community connection, right? I think street art is similar and can play that kind of engagement role. And of course, it's something that everybody can enjoy, and its beauty and its creativity, and brings people together. So I think it's all part of the larger tapestry in these movements and causes.
Yeah, I do too. And a lot of that comes down to what you just said, is about getting people to connect. And they're, just sitting and having coffee with somebody, even if they think differently than you, will usually prevent a level of animosity when you realize the connection that you have with that person. Maybe your kids go to the same school, right? That level of connecting can bridge. Yeah.
It's very local. It reminds me of one of the first socially responsible businesses that came up in the 80s, when business for social responsibility was getting off the ground, and you had Ben and Jerry's and Starbucks and the Body Shop. And one of these business activists founded the White Dog Cafe in Philadelphia, and they started it's a great restaurant, and they have an eating with the enemy night, right? So you come and you meet with people from different political, or in this case, international backgrounds, people on warring sides of conflicts, and they deliberately set up tables where you could break bread and have a free meal together, and fostered connections that way. So there's a role that business can play, just with the restaurant as the public square, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah. Just the act of sharing something together. Food is the easiest thing you could do. People, that's reptilian, and it's just necessary. And it gives you that opportunity to share and connect. And it does feel that if people can make that space, exposure, right? It leads to exposure when you're just being exposed to people different than you, just like the passage in the book.
Yeah.
Right.
Now, you also have to be careful as a business in particular when you step into this, because you have to set it up in the right way. Otherwise, it can backfire. So let me give a not great example. I don't know if you remember, but a few years back, with the best of intentions, Starbucks wanted to get people to talk about race. There had been some race-related violent incidents in some of their stores. And so all the baristas were trained and instructed to try and strike up a conversation, right? And it just totally failed, right? And you got comments like, first of all, I don't want to talk to you about anything, let alone something as personal and visceral as race, before I've had my cup of coffee this morning. Thank you. Right. And also, it's a fleeting experience. You're grabbing your coffee, you're going to work, right? So businesses have tried to be that bridge, but you got to be careful, especially when it's really sensitive, whether a wedge issue. You've got to structure it right, so that people can drop into that space and be comfortable. Otherwise,
you don't want it to be intrusive, because the extreme version of that is being intrusive, where you're like, why are you getting into this with me? I just want my cup of coffee.
I just want my cup of coffee. Another big mistake that business makes is if they think that their product is a solution, or they market that. So there was the really unfortunate ad campaign that Pepsi put out, where they had Kendall Jenner coming up to a big protest line with the cops lined up, and it was an anti-police brutality line, and she hands the Pepsi, and then everybody stands down. That also made everybody angry, because it's, first of all, the celebrity, and second of all, it's such a complex, deeply rooted systemic problem, right? And the fact that this trite can of soda is some kind of going to cause it. So you don't want to put your product. Now, on the other hand, there are the right ways to do this. So let's look at another case Forget what Nike did with Kaepernick. Kaepernick had been suspended from the NFL for taking a knee on behalf of Black lives and to protest police brutality. And Nike had him as their front man, and they stuck with it, right? And a lot of conservatives burned their Nikes and posted the videos on YouTube. But there was more millennials and Gen Z, their Nike's target market. They really were trying to grab market share from Adidas. They were getting beat by Adidas at this point. But the core consumer base of Nike believes and supports what Kaepernick was trying to stand for, right? Or take a knee for. So in that case, Nike used its brand and its amazing brand capital to uplift this cause. They withstood some of the backlash, but the backlash was far smaller than the greater support that they got. And they did it, and they stuck with them. There are all kinds of roles that business can play. Business can use its brands, right, to uplift or advance causes. Whether they do it in the right way or the wrong way. They got some philanthropy, but the biggest thing a business can do is change its operating practices, its policies, to be more friendly to the planet and more inclusive and just for its workers and suppliers. That's probably the most powerful way business can have a positive impact.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think what comes to mind also is authenticity through it, right? You would hope that leadership in the company really believes in those causes and the things that they're doing. Because if you're just doing it to sell, get more market share, that's what they do. It is business. But at the same time, when you come with something so personal, so sensitive, you'd hope that there can be an authenticity there. I was just I won't name it, but a big pharmacy, and they were selling cigarettes. Now, I don't care if you smoke or not, up to me what you want to do, if that's your thing. But it does seem that a pharmacy and a healthcare company shouldn't sell cigarettes.
I know the company you're talking about. We won't name names, but I will tell you the one you were not in is CVS Health. CVS changed its name from CVS to CVS Health. And they dropped cigarettes in 2014 because they said we can't be a health company. And also, we can't be selling you Nicorette over here and cigarettes at the counter, right? CVS Health, they took a huge hit. They lost $2 billion in revenue after dropping cigarettes and everything that goes along with it, gum and lighters and everything. But what it did from a business perspective was opened up all new kinds of opportunities. They were rolling out their CVS, the Minute Clinics. It enabled CVS Health to purchase Aetna insurance. The insurance companies could never be part of a pharmacy chain if they sold. There was all kinds of conflicts there. So it enabled them to be a better healthcare company because they divested from some of the bad stuff and then could go in a direction that the convenience store that you were referencing can't do. Right. Because they still sell cigarettes and liquor. By the way, they have adjacent liquor stores.
The wrong stuff. I just don't know why you would sell that stuff in your store. It's just, you have to have conflicting values at the upper levels of thinking about somewhere money is taking over values. I just don't know what else the issue would be.
It's hard with no company. It's hard to think of a company that's really purely perfect. Patagonia comes to mind. That's a high-end, more luxury type outdoors product. But
they strive in their values. Zappos is another one, right? Zappos does that Nike, too. They're huge on values. Yeah.
If we went back to Nike, Nike stuck with Kaepernick, but Nike also stuck with Tiger Woods and continued to make a lot of money, even though he was really in trouble with women. It also they had a big problem when they came out with one of the new Jordan shoes at Nike, and the design team had designed it with this kind of Betsy Ross flag. And they went out on the street and it was like, here's this Confederate symbol. And they had to pull that. So a lot of this actually companies can avoid if they took D&I seriously, diversity, equity, and inclusion, not just have a prominent spokesperson, but if you had in your focus groups and in your marketing teams, true diverse perspectives, you would not put a Confederate symbol on a million pairs of shoes, right? Or you would not put your Pepsi can at the front of a police brutality protest, right? So companies right now are getting targeted by the conservative right for being too woke. They're getting it from both ends, but they also, they could be smarter about how they incorporate diverse views into all their lines of business, design,
Yeah.
marketing, products, to be more inclusive of audiences, but also to help them avoid some really, these are unforced errors, right? They should not be making.
Yeah. A diverse, and we'll say a mature corporate culture, and how you think about corporate culture, and is really important. It's one of the reasons I've always loved Zappos. I think they've just done an amazing job there, and they
You've
put
got
their values.
Zappos, you got Toms, but I think it's also really, I think companies have it very hard today because there's so many competing stakeholder interests. Like you look at the controversies just this time of our recording, you got Target in the headlines for having to pull some merchandise around LGBT Pride Month. You've got Budweiser, people pouring out their Budweiser because of their brand promotion with a trans influencer.
Oh, yeah.
Huge backlash. And what you've got is a company where you've got your employees, often in corporate and marketing and brands, they want to work for companies that are inclusive and diverse and tolerant, but they might not share the same values as your customer base. And when your values of your employees and the customer base clash, your
Yeah.
investors are not going to be happy, right? Because you're losing, maybe in Budweiser's lost 20 billion in value since that. So, and right now nobody's happy. So it's really hard. And but to your point, I think companies that are really clear on their values and make choices across all of the value chain of activity that they do in alignment with those values are able to steer through this and have a long-term view.
A lot of Tony Hsieh's book. Sadly, he's not with us anymore. It's such a good book, Delivering Happiness. And maybe it talks about some of these things around culture and how he got there. So shout out to Tony Hsieh. But I think one of the themes here is maybe we can all have a little more tolerance for each other and listen first. And sometimes,
And there are companies that are doing this. I think about VF, which owns like Timberland and North Face,
yeah,
Vans. They're looking at sustainability in overseas and there's manufacturing, how they make investments, how they source the energy to power their offices and their plants, right? They're thinking about it not just it's from end to end, from birth of the idea all the way to trying to reuse, upcycle, recycle at the end. There are companies that have these values and are really trying to live by them and making a profit, having a successful business while they do it. I mean, Timberland's one of the iconic, sustainable, socially responsible businesses, but others, it's possible for others too, but you have to make an intentional, conscious choice about it.
what is your vision for the world and all the work that you do and all that you've put out into the planet and all that you write about and all the research? What is your vision for us?
My belief is, and vision for the world is that I fundamentally believe that change is possible. I know it because as we look at these changes, it's remarkable to me. Think about all the issues and changes we just talked about on the show, right? Nobody pretty much smokes in America anymore. There's same-sex marriage allowed in every state. There's more guns than there ever were around. Like incredible changes have happened all in the exact same 2 decades, right? With the same guys in office, the White House, the same Congress, right? Very different political views in the governance chair, but very different outcomes depending on what side of the political aisle that you sit on. So it also tells me that change is possible. And also at the end of the day, change is nonpartisan, right? Change is deliberate. It does not happen by chance. And so I think the people that are going to have the most influence on what happens in our future are those that choose to join and build movements and be the change that they seek in the world.
I want to thank you again for being here. This was awesome. I really enjoyed this. Thank you for all of the inspiration that you've given to so many people through your work. And I really enjoyed this. Very grateful for having you here today.
Me too. I really enjoyed it. It's so great to meet you.
You too. You too. Take care. Okay.
Thanks for letting me be part of the show.
Absolutely.